Welcome back to the Lobster Talks podcast by Lobster Capital, where we celebrate the bold thinkers and innovators driving change in the startup world. I'm your host, Gabriel Jarrosson, and today I'm thrilled to have Ashish Bajaj join us. Ashish is the co-founder of Dime, a startup revolutionizing how manufacturers manage their factories. Ashish, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Gabriel. Very excited for this.
I'm excited as well. I remember our chat vividly around the time you were in YC, so I'm eager to see what's been going on. But let's start with the beginning. Please introduce yourself. Please introduce Dime.
Yeah, absolutely. So where to start? So I'm originally from the Metro Detroit area, born and raised there. I actually grew up thinking I'd be a doctor my whole life. My parents are physicians, so it's kind of a family trade for us. So when I started college at the University of Michigan, I was actually a pre-med student, believe it or not. But just by coincidence, ended up becoming friends with a lot of people from the business schools, joined clubs with them, and over time gravitated my interest more towards finance than medicine. So during the end of my freshman year in college, decided to transfer to the business school and spent a couple of years there. But when deciding what to do after school, gravitated towards investment banking. I think it just seemed like a great starter job at the time. You got lots of responsibility really fast. And most importantly, I think what I loved was just you got to be in the room with executives as they're making some of the most consequential decisions of their careers, whether to sell their company, whether to buy another company, whether to take their company through bankruptcy. And just didn't think there were a lot of opportunities that could rival that experience. So that led me to a bank called Rothschild, where I spent 2 years as an investment banking analyst. And then I transitioned into the investing side of things at TPG 6th Street. So started there in 2019, and my group invested in distressed situations. So where a security or a company might be undervalued due to some extraneous event. And as you can imagine, I was there during 2020 through COVID. So every company was facing a massive extraneous event. And I got to invest in some really exciting companies that were undervalued due to the uncertainty caused by COVID. But in 2021, I'd been in finance for about 4 years, and I started reflecting on what it is that I enjoyed and what I didn't enjoy. And I think I didn't really have that introspective period post-graduation. But as I was doing that reflection, I think the most fun I had in these jobs was talking to operators about how they set and executed a strategy. And I knew that just wasn't something that I would be able to do in an investor's seat. So I decided to become an operator, and as serendipity would have it, a friend of mine knew I was searching for operational roles, and he called me and said, "Hey, I've just started working at the Series A company. We're about to go through a fundraise, and we could use your help to run that process." And literally, we had that conversation. 3 hours later, I tell my boss, "Hey, I'm putting in my 2 weeks, and I'm going to go work at this startup that I didn't really know a lot about." So quit my job and joined this small little company called Butler, which was in the business of aggregating ghost kitchens. They brought me in to run the business operations function, and my first job was helping manage the fundraising process. We ended up raising $35 million in a Series B, and then I was left to lead a team in a really ambiguous role where we were basically just filling different gaps that arose within the company as the company was scaling. So we managed fundraising, we managed strategic partnerships, and managed OKRs, and kept the pulse on how the company was progressing and why our KPIs were moving. And honestly, I just sort of fell in love. It was addicting to see how the things that I was doing, the processes that we were building, were moving the needle within our KPIs. But unfortunately for me, Butler ended up running out of cash about a year and a half after I joined. So we burned through that $35 million, but I had caught that startup bug. I knew that this is what I was meant to do. I was meant to be working in startups. And I think through Butler, I personally gained the confidence myself to become an entrepreneur. So that was around the end of 2022, and I spent a little bit of time after that experimenting with a lot of different ideas prior to teaming up with my co-founder, Akash, and starting Dime.
Amazing. Well, I mean, the funniest thing for me is burning through 35 million in a matter of a year. Things sure have changed. Let's just say that. But it was a different time.
Yeah.
It was a different time.
It was a different time. And I think a lot of businesses were getting funded that weren't necessarily set out for venture capital. Like ghost kitchen businesses are real estate businesses by nature, right? You're investing in heavy capital expenditures for lease improvements, and you're paying a lot of money in these fixed leases. And that necessarily shouldn't be done at hyperscale. When you're signing on 20-year liabilities, there should be a lot of underwriting, a lot of thought put into that. But when you're doing that at venture scale, things tend to go haywire. And that's what happened with Butler.
And, you know, by the way, I want to be more thoughtful about what I just said. I mean, some cases you do absolutely want the company to be burning that much cash if it means they're growing with a profitable business model. It's not always a no. It could actually be a great sign of super fast growth, but not always. And so you're in 2022, you're experimenting, you meet your co-founder. Tell me the kind of origin story of Dime. How did you, first of all, what did you experiment with? Was it in the same area, the same field? And then how did you come to this actual idea?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I'd actually known Akash for some time. I've known him since high school. So I knew he was interested in potentially transitioning into the startup space. He'd been a software engineer at Snapchat for a couple of years, had risen up the ranks really quickly there. So I was just having conversations with him about whether he'd ever be interested in starting his own startups. And that sort of led us to whiteboarding ideas over the weekends. And then those conversations evolved into us making products together. And honestly, it was just an effort to learn how we would work together. So the first thing we ever built was a Copilot for investment bankers. Basically, just like use some ChatGPT API, and we would pre-fill content into templates that we'd built out with the goal of automating pitch deck creation for investment bankers. But we did a lot of this ideation, and honestly, the most compelling ideas revolved around manufacturing for us, and probably for a few reasons. Being from the Metro Detroit area, a lot of our friends are in factories that work inside these plants, and when you're talking to folks about what problems are you facing, our friends consistently reverberated problems to do with manufacturing. And second, Akash has a strong family background in manufacturing. So his dad leads operations at a large tier one auto supplier, and Akash himself just like grew up spending a lot of summers in factories. He interned at Ford his sophomore year in college. So he just naturally gravitated towards that problem space. And what we ended up doing is just visiting a bunch of factories. And I think more than just like resonating with the problem, we resonated with the people there. You'll be surprised. There's a ton of young blood and fresh energy that's going into manufacturing. And over again, you see these people feel bogged down by the way that things have always been done, whether it's archaic processes, archaic people, difficult systems to work with. And as we spent time talking to these people and now potential users, I think we just decided this is a problem space that we could dedicate a decade of our time to. And that was sort of the filter that we were using. What is it that we would be happy spending a decade of our time doing? And solving problems for some of these people seemed past that bar.
Wow, that's really cool. I mean, it's funny and for me to realize that probably one of the, I ask founders all the time, like, how'd you come up with this idea on this podcast and elsewhere as well? And there's a lot of different ways, like, in my previous startup, we did this and that. And that's very common. For you, what's fascinating to me is it's almost where you guys came from, because most of the people you're talking to are into those manufacturing jobs because of the region, which by the way is growing. So that's fascinating to me. And so you're, I believe, in a growing market because there's more and more manufacturing jobs coming back to the US. Was that already on your mind when you started? You're like, actually, we know manufacturing is coming back, so we're going to be into that growing market?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely on our mind, but I don't think we grasped how true that was until we started visiting people in the field. I mean, you see the statistics, right? Like America spent $80 billion on new manufacturing construction in 2021. By 2023, that was $200 billion.
Wow.
You saw all the headlines for the infrastructure bill, but really, like, you go out there and you see people my age that are now taking over CNC machine shops, that are taking over metal fabricators, and that are infusing this new energy into the field as a whole. And even broader than that, I mean, there's a real need for us to onshore these manufacturers. Like just a couple of months ago, there was a news article that cranes that are being built in China are actually spying on US ports. So now US is onshoring some of that crane production. We have this giant push behind EV vehicles in America, but China has the biggest EV manufacturing capacity in the world. Like they can produce a car as good as a Tesla Model 3 for about $11,000. And yes, we're avoiding competing with them by placing all these tariffs on them today, but eventually we're going to have to compete where it matters, on cost, on productivity, and on quality. And I mean, made in China doesn't have the same sort of stigma that it used to a couple of years ago. Chinese products are built with very high quality. They've learned and they've improved on the manufacturing processes that we took over there.
You're absolutely right. You touched on so many points. Made in China is, I mean, there's a range of qualities, but it used to be only bad, and now there's good and bad. There's some very good. Actually, I have this opinion. So I've lived in China for 2 years. I know the area well, I'm not an expert either, but having lived in Shanghai for 2 years, you learn a few things and you remember things. I believe that China is somehow playing unfairly on a level that they don't really respect intellectual property. And it's been proven time and time and time and time again. I mean, you see the latest Xiaomi electric car, it really, really looks like a Tesla. And it's just a couple years after Tesla has a factory in China. You look at all those phones, Xiaomi as well, and or whatever, they look like the iPhone. And we know they're spying on the computers, they're stealing whatever. With France as well, we went there to build the first, nuclear power plant like 20 years ago. And after like having built one, they're like, okay, thank you, we don't need you anymore. And now they're building hundreds, just because they stole our IP. So it's even more potent with the US, obviously. Is Dime the answer? That would be too easy. But how can we fight if they're not fighting fair?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to productivity. They're not fighting fair in terms of they're stealing a technology, but they're winning because they do it at a lower cost than everybody else. They produce all the world's drones. Every commercial drone is basically produced in 2 factories out in Shenzhen because they can do it cheaper. Like to have a flying DJI drone for $300, that's crazy. Like if you really think about the engineering complexity behind a device like that, and to be able to mass produce that and sell that to the world for $300 is insane. The US, the problem is like an average manufacturing job will cost you about $100,000. And our productivity for that $100,000 manufacturing job is much lower than a unit of labor in China, right? They're just able to enforce a higher discipline on their labor than we can here. And for the right reasons, right? Like we shouldn't be treating people like the way they do in China. But that being said, we need to fight on the cost level. We need to be more productive in our manufacturing environments here. And honestly, a lot of the answers people have to that is sort of these dark factories. And you see these models come up with Hadrian, Anduril's kind of exploring that model as well in the defense space. And people think that the future is sort of these completely automated factories where humans won't exist. And well, that might be the case 30 years down the road, but like you visit any factory in America today and they can't run without people.
Of course.
And you look at somebody like Elon Musk, and I don't know if you've had a chance to read his biography, but one of the critical mistakes he made during the Model 3s, automating too much, exactly. And then he had to go back and pull out some of that automation just because, I mean, humans can still do some things a lot better than robots can, and that's going to be the case for at least the next decade.
I'm so happy we've read the same book. It's such a good book, by the way. Go read Elon's biography by Walter Isaacson. He's a great biographer. He also wrote the Steve Jobs biography, which is also a great book. But Elon's one, I just finished it a couple weeks ago, and
nice.
It's brilliant. It just, it gave me so much sense into this guy's life. Anyway, we're not here talking about Elon, but maybe the next one. Let's just hope. So first of all, I'm guessing Dime is only for humans. Could Dime also help productivity with machines? And also, is Dime one of the solutions? I'm guessing it's not the entire solution for the entire world, but is it one of the solutions to improve productivity?
Yeah, so our vision for Dime is to build a central nervous system for factories to control the planning and the tracking procedures of the factory. So Dime is a platform today that allows discrete manufacturers to plan and track their production in one place. So if you look at these workflows, production planning and production tracking tend to be disconnected parts of the broader production process, the process by which factories produce parts. On the production scheduling side, again, production scheduling is the process by which somebody schedules production to be done on machines. That happens today through either a plant manager, a production manager, or somebody that's Excel savvy on the production team. They'll basically plan out what a plant needs to produce that week or that day using Excel. They'll pull together a bunch of pieces of data, order data, inventory data, bill of materials data, and they'll combine all these pieces of information to put together a schedule that ensures customers get their orders on time. They'll then go out and disseminate this information using whiteboards or shift-by-shift production meetings. So as you can tell, it's quite a manual and quite a labor-intensive process. And the reason it's happening in Excel and requiring so much manual effort today is because these sophisticated ERP systems that folks are using just aren't so good at adjusting to real-time changes. So in a real-time production environment, things change quite rapidly, right? A machine could go down due to mechanical failure, raw materials could go out of stock, or production just might happen slower that day for whatever reason, like cycle times might be elongated. And ERP systems today just don't adjust well for that. So it's much easier for a production planner to just switch a couple of cells in Excel or erase things on a whiteboard and rewrite it, rather than spend another hour in the production planning module in SAP to come up with a new production plan. So that's one of the issues. The other component is tracking production. So for a manufacturer to know whether they're on track relative to their production plan, it generally requires meticulous tracking. And people don't have that sophisticated of a tracking process today. Usually the way they figure out what they produced is by somebody going in at the end of the day or at the end of the week and counting inventory. And until that happens, they don't know what they produce. And by then, it's way too late to take corrective actions. So these things are impacting the productivity in manufacturing environments. And we talked about China. China has a very digital platform for their factories, right? That's what the government has pushed. They've over time gotten all these factories to digitize and automate so much of their processes that we in the US just have not kept up. And if you dig into the root cause of why production planning and production tracking are so manual today, it's because the systems that American manufacturers use just have not evolved in a long time. We're running the same pieces of software that we were in the 1990s and the 2000s. And that's true, even though the complexity and the supply chains of what we're manufacturing have changed and increased significantly. So that's the problem we're tackling. Dime basically ingests real-time data so that manufacturers have a fully up-to-date production plan. And then we track performance against that plan using real-time production data from the machines themselves. So we actually plug into the PLC chips and we extract some of that data, and then we use that to feed into our production plan so that factories always have a real-time, up-to-date production plan.
Wow, that's awesome. You sort of maybe sensed my question or advanced it anyway. I wanted to ask you, what's the state of the art in China? It seems they're years and years and years ahead. And I want to ask you, why do you think that is? Is there a Chinese version, a Chinese Ashish who built this 10 years ago and sold it to everyone? Or how come there's such a difference? Because in terms of tech, I mean, the US are leading still and always have.
Yep.
How come?
A couple of reasons. Number one, best and brightest in America don't focus on manufacturing. Nice. They go into Silicon Valley, and they call it the SaaS brain, the brain suck, right? A lot of the smartest minds of our generation have gone out and built SaaS products and not focused on manufacturing.
Where in China, manufacturing is so important that, yeah.
There you go, right? They go and work at Huawei. They go and work at some of the largest manufacturers out there, and that's why they've sort of eclipsed us in where we were. And number two, the unfair nature you were talking about of Chinese government really going out and hammering manufacturing and providing all these incentives for folks to, first of all, manufacture more and more, but then also forcing them to digitize their systems and automate their processes so that they have more capacity than the rest of the world. I mean, China's game isn't just produced for China, it's produced for the rest of the world, right? Like they export more cars than they actually consume internally.
And they consume a lot, but still.
Exactly.
And so I want to, I think last time we talked was around YC. So that's, let's call it 6 months ago or 4 or 5, whatever. Tell me how it's been going on since we last spoke.
Yeah, it's probably been about 3-4 months since we last talked. Honestly, it's been an absolute roller coaster. I think YC itself, over those 10 weeks, you have such a large sprint. And then the goal that we had right after YC is just to retain that same level of intensity. So it's been an absolute roller coaster. Like some weeks we'll have an absolutely epic week. We'll have great sales. We'll implement successfully. People will be using our product a lot and everything feels great. We're like, we are on to a big idea. And then other weeks we'll release a new feature and everything will just break. And you kind of have to deal with that emotional roller coaster. And I think that was one of the great things that YC did for us. They treat it more like a psychology course rather than anything. One of the biggest focuses is just making sure you keep your mind right. And those sort of principles is what we've been trying to apply to our roller coaster here for the past 3 or 4 months. But I mean, to answer your question concisely, it's been a roller coaster, but it's been a ton of fun. And we've learned more than we could ever imagine over the past 3 months.
Don't worry about being concise. I mean, when you record an almost hour-long podcast, we have time. But it's crazy. I think this is following me around. The more I talk to founders, the more I dig into this, the more I realize it is more psychological, it's a psychology course and a mental thing to succeed more than anything else. I mean, you could be a great coder, a great salesman. If you don't have the good mental space, you're not going to make it. I keep hearing this more. So, and I know for sure that it's true. Was this, you think, the number one thing that YC kind of brought you, the number one thing you took out of YC, or was there something even more important that you took out of it?
No, 100%. It was the psychology of it all. And it makes a ton of sense, right? Like YC deals with such a broad base of companies. Like we have dev tools, we've got sort of these AI coding tools, which are kind of dominating a lot of the conversation today. We've got companies that are building in sports. We've got companies like ours building in manufacturing. So the consistent theme across all of these is just founder mentality. I think the quotes that they like to throw around here, most startups don't actually fail because they run out of money. They fail due to co-founder conflict. So it's managing a conversation with a co-founder. How can you guys disagree and still come to the right conclusion? That's number one. And number two, things break, right? On LinkedIn, you see all these founders and it looks like it's a journey straight up to the right. It's
Yeah.
never the case, right? It's usually ups and downs and you're all kind of progressing in the right direction, and that's sort of the goal. So it's how do you keep the same level of intensity and the same level of energy despite all the hurdles that come along the way?
It's so interesting to me that you said the number one thing is the psychology. I'm not surprised, obviously, with what you said before. And, my fund, Lobster Capital, chose to invest only in YC. And that's a choice. I could be investing, anywhere else. I chose YC because it's the best incubator in the world and the numbers just don't lie. The numbers prove with 6% unicorn rate, 39% Series A rate, like there's mortality, of course, it's not a 100% hit rate. And to think that all of this is not about whatever secret scaling acquisition technique or whatever. I wrote an article earlier today and I mentioned that the number one thing YC partners say to founders is just don't die. And you're like, wait a minute, this is so simple. Like this is the best incubator in the world. So it all comes down to this. Again, to anyone listening to us, think how profound that is. The best incubator in the world with the best statistics is not only, but mostly working on the psychology of its founders, how to disagree as a team and how to just keep going. Isn't that insane? And this gives them the best results ever in the world. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a ton of sense because you think about it, if they're giving you tactical advice, more than likely it's going to be outdated in a couple of years. Like Sam Altman had a great quote back a couple of years ago where he said, I feel bad for all the founders because I think I've given them wrong advice. And I think Michael Siebel had a great retort to that where it's like, no, Sam, you actually didn't give the wrong advice. You gave the right advice for the time, but those are no longer the times. Like back in the early 2010s and maybe even the mid 2010s, cold emailing was sort of the way people went out and acquired customers. And today, with all the new safeguards that Gmail and Outlook have implemented, it's not as great of a channel anymore. Like people are lucky to get response rates that they did a couple of years ago. So people have to adjust the tactics, but the psychology of the founder remains the same. It's perseverance. It's making sure that you know how to work well with your co-founder. And then again, it's making sure that you stay focused on the fundamentals. And I think that's what YC really, really hammers into you. Make sure, like, I think one of my favorite quotes is logs don't lie. So that's the number one thing we look for at all times. Like, how does usage look? How are our logs looking? And what are people actually using? Because it's very, very easy in this game to find false signals every single place. You'd have a great fundraising success and you could think that's a great signal. A couple of customers that you talk to can tell you that, hey, I love your product, but if they're not willing to pay for it, that's the wrong signal. So I think that focus on fundamentals that YC really drills into us has been extremely helpful for us so far.
I want to draw a parallel to something that just, came to my mind listening to you. A couple of years ago, I tried to learn about copywriting, which is a very useful skill as an entrepreneur, how to write something impactful that makes people want to take action, makes people want to purchase, etc. And you have all of those whatever trends, like if you put some capital letters at the beginning, or if you use Sam Altman's name in your email, or Donald Trump, or whoever's fancy, people are going to open it. And then, so that's the sort of tricks that stay for a couple months. And then, so I read a lot of books, I followed some, online courses and stuff like that. Then you have the people teaching you about intrinsic human psychology. And they teach you about the human brain, how we function as a person, about curiosity, about biases. It's so interesting because now today, I haven't been doing any copywriting for years and years and years, but I think I'm still pretty decent or probably quite good just because the human brain never changes. I mean, it probably will change in the next, hundreds of thousands of years, but it doesn't really change. And books written like 50, 75, 100 years ago are still very true. So it reminds me of this. And again, in so many things you might be thinking when you're learning, when you're applying this model of thinking, oh, let me learn about the real fundamental things that are never going to change. And for entrepreneurship, it's this as well. And so again, that's why YC is the very best. It's this intrinsic thing that's never going to change. I want to go back to something you said. It's also a question that I probably asked this question already a couple times to a couple YC founders. I want to ask you again because I haven't found the exact model yet. So I'm going to ask again and again until I really understand it. You mentioned after YC, you want to retain the same level of intensity. Everybody says YC is so great because let's call it like it is. They light a giant fire under your ass and you just have to ship and sell and whatever at the same time. But then you're out of YC and you're basically on your own. And there's a lot of people, including me, who haven't been inside YC, but who would love to replicate this giant fire and this sense of urgency, which is also in the book about Elon Musk, by the way. He talks about the maniacal sense of urgency.
Yep.
So how do you keep this alive?
Yeah, I mean, the model that they used inside YC was effectively like peer pressure, right? Like we would meet with a pod, basically like 8 or 9 companies, and we would all have 2-week goals that we'd set out for ourselves every 2 weeks. And you want to show up at the end of those 2 weeks showing that you've progressed against those goals, because I mean, these are all very talented people that you're sitting in the same room with, and you don't want to be the person that has done nothing and not achieved their goals. So we've tried to retain some of those same habits. I think what's been very helpful for Akash and myself is keeping those 2-week goals very, very steady. Now, I think things change and goals have to shift over time just because of new learnings, but really still having that sort of benchmark. Every 2 weeks, we want to see what we did the last 2 weeks. And then I think one thing that we've gotten good at recently is just making sure we know why we're doing something. So having a thesis behind why we're taking a certain action, having a thesis behind what we want a certain feature to do and what defines a success. And then as long as you can sort of stay intellectually honest with yourself, you're kind of driven by yourself, right? Like, I want to see my KPI move for XYZ reason. And if it's not moving, you're driven to figure out why it's not moving. So I think, yeah, the same structure of 2 weeks goals has been really, really helpful. And then as we've just added more and more customers, just making sure that they're happy has kept us going.
2-week goals. Sounds easy, right?
Sounds easy. It sounds basic, but it works. And I think we also stay in touch with our YC group. So we do that sort of 2-week meeting on a monthly cadence now. And you still sort of have that same level of peer pressure because, again, you're dealing with the same kind of people.
Oh, that's cool. I've heard this a lot. Like, people usually say, oh, we stay in touch with them. It's good for you. For us, it doesn't work. But okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned adding more and more customers, which is always exciting. Congrats on adding more and more. Let's talk about this because it's obviously something that's probably solves a real need and a real problem, but also not that easy to sell, I'm sure, because it's a lot of moving pieces and factories or, big, complex places. And we've talked about cold emailing not working anymore. So you probably have a good idea on how to sell today, even though it's going to be outdated in 3 years. But can you talk about your sales strategy and maybe some people could be inspired and replicate that? What has been working for you?
Yeah, I will caveat this by saying that manufacturing is a lot different than most other fields out there. I mean, you just got to imagine what it's like inside of a factory. Like, people don't have a desk job. People aren't like by their computers all day long. They're literally walking a factory. Phones are also usually banned inside of a factory environment. It's usually not safe to do that. So the thing that works with us is sort of getting out there in person, conferences, things of that nature. And number 2, cold calling. As long as you kind of have a precise ICP and you've got a good script, if people will pick up the phone and we can get them to the next stage of our funnel, we have a much better success rate, a great success rate if that happens. And what we try to do from there is get a factory visit schedule. Once we get them on the phone, what we want to do next is get to the factory. And once they see us face to face, because a lot of the questions we usually tend to get around is like, okay, how are you better? There's like 5 of these solutions out there. And it's very hard to convince somebody with words, right? Like, it's not necessarily you say the right sequence of words and they believe you. So we actually have to show them. We have to show them how they can have an easier life by using our product. And it's much easier to do that face to face. So we probably more than most spend a lot of our times on the road. We fly out to these factories, whether they're in the Midwest, whether they're in Atlanta, Georgia, wherever they might be. We go out there and we visit these people face to face. And once that happens, first of all, you develop that relationship, which it's impossible to do over email, right? Like, you have that same level of understanding over email. And number 2, like, once they're able to see our product in live form and envision how they could work with it, we have a good success rate.
That's awesome. That's so inspiring. So I take 2 things. Well, I'll take many more, but the 2 things I want to recap. One is, don't be afraid to sort of try different things. Your market is different. So, for your case, it's no emails, no phones, or, and cold calling, which you might think it's a big no-no. Maybe try it in your industry and it works. That's one thing. And the second thing I want to kind of take out of that is what's in it for them. That's always what people want to know. So you say, you just said it so simply, but it's so important. Like, once they realize that using Dime, their life is going to be easier. So you want to make the life easier. That's really, and so another question, I'm just, jumping to the next one because it's, for me, very logical. Listening to you, I thought to myself, did you decide to stay in Silicon Valley Or do you want to go back, have your headquarters in a place where there's much more manufacturing happening around you?
Yeah, so we're actually based out of New York City now, and part of that decision was to do with the fact that traveling back and forth from San Francisco to the Midwest is much more challenging. A 6-hour flight versus a 2-hour flight is a lot tougher. That being said, funny enough, Akash and I just had this talk yesterday about whether we want to move back to San Francisco. And a lot of that reasoning just has to do with we want to be around the same folks that we were around in YC. That energy is contagious, right? And like we are willing to make the sacrifices of having a longer travel just to be around those sort of people. And I think like the level of conviction and the level of motivation that people have to build new companies, it's impossible to replicate outside of San Francisco. Like New York is a great place. There's a lot of startups starting here. But still, I don't think we have the same level of energy that San Francisco does.
There you have it for all of those folks saying New York is so good. I mean, I'm exactly on your side. I mean, don't get me wrong, New York is awesome. One of my favorite cities on earth as a city. But for entrepreneurs, it seems like there's nothing like San Francisco. And, you know, just if people keep saying it, it's for a reason, including people like you who are in New York. I think it's a smart move for you guys, but I'll let you take the decision. And of course, very sorry about the long commute that you guys are going to have to endure. But at some point, maybe at some point in the very long future, you have someone else doing this for you. For sure, you want to keep this in your hand for now.
Yeah, for sure. I think until we know how to sell our product consistently, it doesn't make sense for somebody else to take that off our plate. And I think the other thing to kind of close the note on San Francisco, as we were looking to add to our team and add a founding engineer, one of the things we realized is talent density is a lot greater on the startup space in San Francisco. Not to say that there aren't fantastic software engineers within New York,
of course,
but you'll notice that they tend to work at some of the bigger tech companies, right? They're used to working at Facebook and Google and going to their offices and working that sort of lifestyle, which doesn't necessarily work for somebody in the startup land.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I want to go back to manufacturing in the US. There's obviously a huge push. It's been bipartisan, which is there's not that many issues that are, so we should mention that. And so it's very likely to continue beyond the next election cycle, whoever wins. But it's also, I guess, changing so rapidly, including with technology. I mean, you're not the only one to realize that there's a technological debt. And so like you said, there's maybe 5 other solutions out there, and there's probably going to be more and more and more. My question to you is, how do you I mean, maybe the answer is you're just on the factory floor all the time, but how do you stay ahead? Like, how do you know what's going on, what's evolving, and how are you adapting to stay ahead of the game to make sure that you're still relevant a year from now, which I'm sure you're going to be, but I want to know how you're going to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that differentiates us is definitely the fact that we spend more time on the factory floor. And number 2, we're building for a different audience than most of the people that are building manufacturing tech are. Like you'll notice a lot of the tools that have some of the same functions that we do that are startups, they tend to sell to hardware engineers, folks that want to have better communication to the factory floor, but aren't necessarily on the factory floor itself. And we want to solve for the production manager, the plant manager, the folks whose KPI it is to just have the most efficient production process possible. And that's the person that we want to solve for. So I think it's just a difference of focus. Their ICP is a little different than what we are. And obviously that has to do with the background of most of these people, right? Like the people building these companies come from Tesla, or they come from Lucid, or they come from Rivian, which are great companies and great manufacturers, but they're cut from a different cloth than a fiber plant based out of Ohio.
That makes so much sense. Okay. Before we end, there's one very important question that I ask everyone. Is there a book or a quote that you could recommend to us that had a significant impact on your life?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to say Principles by Ray Dalio, if some of your listeners haven't read it. And Ray Dalio, for those that are unfamiliar, he's considered one of the greatest investors of all time. He runs a hedge fund, or ran a hedge fund called Bridgewater, which is probably the best performing hedge fund of all time. And contrary to what you'd think, that the book doesn't focus at all on how to be the best investor, how to read the markets. It's basically about Ray and how he's created these systems to cultivate, evaluate, upskill talent. And it centers around these repeatable processes that he continues to refine over time so that everyone across the firm has aligned incentives. And it's not quite as applicable at the stage that Dime's at, but I think from what I've seen in my experience at Butler and some of these other organizations, making sure that people are rowing in the same direction is sort of the biggest challenge there is. And misalignment is the biggest risk, because labor is expensive, and people spending money running experiments that are leading you the different direction is very, very dangerous.
Yeah, thank you for that recommendation. I read it a couple of years ago. It's such a profound book. And I took away from it mostly the same thing as you were. What's fascinating for me, when I read it, is this sort of systems that he built. And the system is built with your own thinking, and it's here to sort of be a mirror, to have a conversation with yourself, sort of. But everyone can join in. It's like not your own brain, but the company's brain, and to keep you in check, and you keep refining those systems. It's so fascinating. Of course, after reading this, you're like, oh my God, I want to do this. And of course, your company is too small. Yours apparently, and mine as well at the time. But just fascinating guy. And yeah, what he accomplished is insane. Thank you very, very much for that recommendation. I do advise to everyone to read that. If people want to be in touch with you and or with Dime, where can they find you online?
Yeah, you can go visit our website, dimemanufacturing.com. And if you want to have a chat, if you're a manufacturer that's interested in what we're building, reach out anytime at founders@dimemanufacturing.com.
That's absolutely awesome. Ashish, thank you so much for being on the show. I had a great time. I hope you did as well. It was awesome.
Thanks, Gabriel. Appreciated it.
Awesome. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on the Lobster Talks. Don't forget to subscribe for more conversations like this. And until next time, of course, don't forget to leave us a review. Stay bold, stay curious, and remember, those big ideas start somewhere.